Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar on AmeriCorps 101. My name is Rachel Mattingly and I work with the Indiana Association for Community Economic Development, and today I'm joined by Elspeth O'Neill from Serve Indiana. In a moment, Elspeth will be sharing with us about the history of AmeriCorps and its goals, with a special focus on the AmeriCorps State Program, which is run by Serve Indiana. She'll also discuss the qualifications for host organizations as well as AmeriCorps members and how you can apply to become a host organization. Let's jump right in and start with an overview of service programs nationally.
At the top here, you see the Corporation for National Community Service and their website, nationalservice.gov. They have a ton of information on there about AmeriCorps, Senior Corps, their other initiatives that are listed on this slide. So I would encourage people to check them out. They're also a great resource for if you don't want to take AmeriCorps funding, that's okay. They have lots of information about volunteerism, about how to connect to your to national service members in your community, all that kind of fun stuff. So they're a great resource in general. But under CNCS, the federal funder, are two types of national service programs. There's Senior Corps on the left here, and then AmeriCorps on the right. I'll talk briefly about Senior Corps. You may have heard of them through several different types of programs that they have. So there's three types of Senior Corps programs: the Retired Senior Volunteer Program, RSVP. A lot of folks have heard about Senior Corps through the RSVP program. It's very similar to an AmeriCorps member, but it's someone who's over 55 who is serving in a nonprofit or government entity in a certain capacity. The second type of Senior Corps program is the Foster Grandparent Program. And it is what it sounds like, right? So it's partnering Senior Corps members with young people who maybe don't have a good mentor in their life, or they need help with school. A lot of times they're in schools helping with tutoring and mentoring and that sort of thing. The last type of Senior Corps program is the Senior Companions Program, and this is where a senior is matched with another senior who maybe needs additional assistance in some way. So one of the key examples we always talk about is maybe the person needs assistance getting to their doctor's appointments, or they're receiving their Meals on Wheels. The Senior Companion would help the other senior in those types of situations. The bulk of what we're going to talk about today is AmeriCorps, though. So on the right-hand side, AmeriCorps has three different types of programs, and with that, they have the three different types of applying for funding, right? So there's AmeriCorps State and National. AmeriCorps State is what we run out of Serve Indiana, and through any commission who is similar in another state would run their funding, and it's just within that state. So that the services provided through an AmeriCorps State program have to be in one specific state. AmeriCorps National is lumped under here as well because both state and national are direct service. So members are actually engaging directly with community members versus other types of positions are more indirect. So national programs, those are organizations that apply directly to the Corporation for National Community Service, and they would comprise more than one state. So you know, so they're a national nonprofit and they have several different affiliates or chapters in different states. The national funder or national nonprofit would apply directly to CNCS and then send members to each state. So in Indiana, we have both state and national members, but we at Serve Indiana only fund AmeriCorps state programs. Then there's AmeriCorps Vista, which is Volunteers in Service to America. This is the longest running AmeriCorps program. It originally was on its own and most recently has been pulled into the AmeriCorps umbrella. Vista members are more in direct service. They have to be part of a 3-year plan, and most of the time there's less Vista members in the states than there are AmeriCorps state members. And that is because Vistas have to be full-time. Primarily they're full-time. Usually they're individuals who have a college degree who are taking on this Vista position, whereas AmeriCorps State has less qualifications than Vista. And then lastly, there's the NCCC, the National Civilian Community Corps. This is a group of 18 to 24-year-olds who travel around the country for 6 to 8 weeks at a time. They'll have different bases throughout the U.S., so the closest one to us is in Iowa. But say you had like you needed a project done over a 6-week period. The NCCC, you could apply to have NCCCs come to your organization in your area and help you complete that project. So an example of this with Habitat is when there was the tornado in Henryville. When I was at the state office, we applied to have 2 NCCC groups come and help organize the the blitz build that we were having. So we were building 10 houses. They helped organize that, and then throughout the build, the second group was there to really help us continue that organization. So that's kind of the basics of what CNCS offers. A little bit of history about AmeriCorps. So a lot of people think that while CNCS is a newer federal organization, the U.S. has a long history of AmeriCorps. A long history of service in the U.S. So in 1933, a lot of people have heard about the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. We see this is the roots of what AmeriCorps is today. So we talked about NCCC. The Civilian Conservation Corps, right, was young men who were out in their communities helping with infrastructure because they, at that time, couldn't find a job, or it was because it was part of the New Deal, right? So that we talked to members about how that is the start of what we see as service programming in the U.S. Then we have the Peace Corps, and then a few years after that, VISTA was started because it was recognized that it's great to send people out into the world to create peace and to accomplish these projects throughout the world, but we have to recognize that there are issues in the U.S. as well. So VISTA was started out of the war on poverty. And then in 1993, the CNCS started, and the first class of AmeriCorps started in 1994. So it's kind of a young program in a lot of ways, but it hasn't made a large impact over the 21 plus years that we've had AmeriCorps. And then the last big milestone is the 2009 Serve America Act, and that's how a lot of people hear about AmeriCorps because when this was signed, President Obama wanted to triple the amount of AmeriCorps members in the United States. So we haven't quite gotten there yet, but it really put a kind of a facelift to AmeriCorps and what it stands for, and so that's why a lot of people have heard about it. The next slide has a lot of history makers in national service, and I'm not going to talk a lot about this. I often bring this up when I'm in high school talking about AmeriCorps because I like to quiz kids about which president is which. But for organizations, what I like to say is that, you know, AmeriCorps has a lot of bipartisan support. You see on this slide both Republicans and Democrats, and on either side of the aisle, AmeriCorps has been supported since its inception in 1994 with Bill Clinton. So, you know, service and volunteerism is important to the U.S., and we just like to say that AmeriCorps is a large part of that. So you've probably heard me say service a lot versus volunteering, or the AmeriCorps members are members, not volunteers or employees. So service is different than volunteering, and it's different than working full-time. We like to talk about it as sort of this in-between. It's in between those two things. While volunteerism is important, we don't pay our volunteers, and we would never pay an employee the minimum stipend that members receive. So service is different. And this quote on the screen is from Bill Clinton's address to the first group of AmeriCorps members in 1994. And when I ran an AmeriCorps program, I told this to every single one of my starting members because it is important. It talks about how service is a spark to rekindle the spirit of democracy in an age of uncertainty. When it's all said and done, it comes down to three simple questions. What is right? What is wrong? And what are we going to do about it? Today you are doing what is right, turning your words into deeds. So AmeriCorps can be difficult for a lot of members because they receive a stipend, they aren't actually paid a paycheck, they are doing this sort of out of the goodness of their heart, but it is rekindling that spirit of democracy. So that's how we talk about service and how it's different. Okay, so AmeriCorps State, again, this is the funding that we offer through Serve Indiana, so I know it the best. But the purpose is to engage members in direct service. So they have the program has an overarching logic model and goal with performance measures that the member is engaging directly in. So they have capacity build efforts, and the goal is to address an unmet community need. So a lot of programs expand upon what their organization is already working on, or they like to replicate a successful model that they have seen elsewhere. Our role is the funder, so there are state commissions located in every state charged with overseeing the application, training and technical assistance, and monitoring process of the grantees that we fund. And then programs, those are the ones who actually recruit and retain the members. They make sure that the programming is moving forward as the AmeriCorps host. So those are nonprofit organizations, universities, colleges, government entities that apply to us at Serve Indiana to have an AmeriCorps state program. This next slide kind of goes a little bit further into who is involved. So like I said, the member does the direct service. Overseeing them would be a site supervisor. That person is at the service site where the member is serving. That could be the organization that applied to host the AmeriCorps program, or it could be the partners that the program has throughout their community or the state. And then there's a program director, and that's the staff person at the organization who administers the grants. They oversee the members. They're the main contact with us at Serve Indiana. The program host is the organization who applies, and then they're overseen by a program officer at Serve Indiana. And then we, as a whole entity of Serve Indiana, are overseen by our federal funder at CNCS. A lot of times people ask me, okay, we are thinking about being an AmeriCorps program, but what does that mean for us? So we encourage any and all organizations to apply. There are some minimum qualifications that you can find in the application, but if you're a 501c3, a government entity, you can apply to have an AmeriCorps program. I am honest with people that it does take a fair amount of capacity to be able to do this, and you have to be well established as a nonprofit. But like I say, anybody can apply, and we conduct a pre-award risk assessment to determine the feasibility of that program and of the host organization. So we review things like your cash flow, your administrative ability, your previous grant experience, your staff capacity, to make sure that the members would have a successful experience. And on this slide, I also have examples of organizations who currently have programs. Habitat for Humanity of Indiana, Boys and Girls Clubs of Indianapolis, Teach for America is located here, and we fund them. The University of Notre Dame, Phelan Leadership Academy. So there's a lot of different organizations, so you can kind of gauge the size of these organizations and how they host members. You also have to, if you're thinking about applying to have an AmeriCorps program, you have to focus, you have to be under the CNCS focus areas. And each of those focus areas have specific performance measures that align with the focus area. And the idea there is that we can say, nationally, all the members under disaster recovery who are under this performance measure are engaging communities in these ways. It really helps us stay structured. You can still have your own performance measures if you want in addition to these focus areas, but this is the minimum that you have to have when you apply to have a program. So you could have a program in disaster recovery, economic opportunity, education, environmental stewardship, healthy futures, or veterans and military families. So like I say, you select a focus area, and then you create your program under that focus area based on evidence or previous program model that you have seen implemented elsewhere. Like I said, those are the basic qualifications and sort of the minimum to apply to be an AmeriCorps program. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is member qualifications. So to be an AmeriCorps member, there are some basic qualifications, and these are usually nationwide the same, but we have some state-specific ones located in here as well. So if you look up maybe like Iowa's qualifications to be a member, they'll have the same basic ones, but they may have a little bit more. It just depends on the commission and the type of funding. So the basic qualifications to be an AmeriCorps member is that a member has to be a U.S. citizen, U.S. national legal permanent resident of the U.S., they have to be at least 18 years of age upon completion of their service, and they have to have a high school diploma or its equivalency by the end of their service. What do members do? Well, in Indiana, we have 18 programs across the state. A majority of them are in Indianapolis, but we have folks located in Gary, Fort Wayne, Evansville, all throughout the state of Indiana. And again, each year we fund about 650 members. Each of these members engage in direct service and volunteer recruitment, so they have to expand a program or replicate a successful model like I've been talking about. But they can serve in a variety of ways. So a lot of people think that AmeriCorps members have to be full-time. For AmeriCorps State, they do not have to be full-time. So it's based on the number of hours that they serve, the type of position that they are in. A full-time member serves 1,700 hours for a 10 to 12-month term. A half-time position is 900 hours, and they can serve that 20 hours a week for a year, or they could do it for 6 months at a full-time capacity. Just depends on what the program wants to do. You would get to decide that as the organization. There's also reduced half-time, quarter-time, and minimum-time members. So what we tell organizations is that we think it's best to have 15 minimum members, so it doesn't have to be like the full-time equivalent. You can have 15 minimum time members, and that is the minimum you can apply for. We may be upping that to 20 this year, just giving you a little heads up. But because we believe that if you have 15 members at least, then you're going to make the most impact on your performance measures. Okay. Now, what can't members do, right? So a lot of times they're like, oh, I can just have a member do like anything. They're cheap labor. It's awesome. That is not at all how we see service or AmeriCorps funding. So AmeriCorps members do have to abide by prohibited activities. And what I like to say about members is they should be, while serving, a neutral member of society. So they're not going to lean left or right politically. They're not going to be religious or not religious. They are just this person who is doing service, and that's pretty much all they know about during their service hours. Outside of those hours, they can choose to do anything that they would like, but they just can't represent themselves as an AmeriCorps member in these prohibited activities. So members can't fundraise more than 10% of their time, so they can't be like your development director. They can't be involved in political activities. An example of this is helping people register to vote. They cannot do that as AmeriCorps members. They can't lead prayer as part of their service or representing themselves as AmeriCorps members. Provide direct benefits to for-profit organizations, provide abortion services, replace staff or volunteers, or really conduct administrative duties. The last two are really important. A lot of folks think, oh, well, we don't have a lot of staff. We have a lot of staff, but we are paying too much, right? So like, let's fire them and replace them with AmeriCorps members. That's not what we see AmeriCorps members as doing. They should enhance what you do at your organization. And while we understand that if they're in the office with you, they're going to do some administrative duties, that shouldn't be their main role. They really should be building capacity for you. So then now you're thinking, like, this seems like a lot of work, there's all these rules. Well, that is maybe true. There are a lot of benefits to organizations. If you're the host organization, so if you have the program at your organization, you do receive operational dollars to run this program. So a lot of folks have brought on new staff members because of the AmeriCorps program, so they run the AmeriCorps program, and as they feel more comfortable, they may take on new tasks at your organization. It brings in new leadership and ideas. It helps with capacity building. It helps strengthen and or create new partnerships in your communities. It also helps you engage into a larger network. I know when I was a program director, we have trainings that we are required to attend 4 times a year. And at those trainings is where I really felt like I helped strengthen our organization, because I was meeting with other nonprofits and like-minded individuals who could really help grow our organization. And again, you get to have a larger impact in one area. So maybe you guys are focusing on youth engagement right now, and you have this one program that you engage youth in. But then you start thinking about, well, wouldn't it be great if we could start working with teens, or if we could have this program? AmeriCorps members can help you with those type of things. And then if you have service sites, so if you have partners where the members will be located outside of your organization, it's the same sort of benefits, right? They get to be part of a larger network. They get to grow their capacity, and it gives them new leadership and ideas, just like it does for the host organization. Members also receive benefits. So I talked about the stipend a little bit. For a full-time member, the minimum stipend is about $13,000 a year. That is taxed. When I was a member, it was $11,000 a year. So it goes up every year by a little bit. But the idea with the stipend is that a member is being compensated for their time, but it isn't supposed to be a paycheck. It's not based on the hours that they serve. Instead, it's supposed to meet the minimum living living and bills that they need to pay, right? So like I could pay my rent and my utilities, and that was about it as an AmeriCorps member. They do, at the end of their service, receive an education award. For a full-time member, that's about $5,700 that they can use for qualified student loans, future schooling, or other educational opportunities. And that's really like the carrot at the end of their AmeriCorps service. So if you get to the service, you can have an education award. With that, if a member is serving full-time, they can put their loans into forbearance if they qualify, and then AmeriCorps pays off the interest that accrues during that time. And the last thing about loans is that if you've heard of the Public Student Loan Forgiveness Program, a full-time term of service can count as a year towards that program and getting your loans repaid by the government. The last thing that we talk about with benefits is that personal professional development. In Indiana, 12 to 20% of a member's time has to be spent in training. And if you think about your first job or your first experience outside of college, you probably got an orientation and then maybe nothing else after that. But the member, really, we focus on their personal and professional development. We have statewide training standards that that programs are required to abide by, so that every member across the state is receiving the same type of training topics at a minimum. So we see that as a great development for folks in Indiana, and that kind of goes into my last point. So on the right side of the screen, you can see a graphic here about how volunteerism really can lead to employment. So CNCS put on this study, and they found that volunteers have a 27% higher odds of finding employment than non-volunteers, and we relate that to service as well. So we say if you're a service member, you have all these new connections, right, and you are going to have a higher likelihood of finding employment after your service. And the numbers go up if you're in a rural area and you don't have a high school diploma. So we tell members that all the time. If you do this year of service, if you do 6 months of service or the summer term of service, and you put that on your resume, it's going to show people that you have a you're committed to your community and that you gain these skills, and it's going to help you with your employability. So lastly, I'm going to talk about the just next steps. How you could be involved with AmeriCorps if you want to be. We do have an application process. Say you wanted to have a program with your organization. The application instructions will be on our website at the end of August, and the application is always due for new programs at the end of October, early November. There will be some training and technical assistance calls with our contact, Cecily, at our office. If you're applying to be a new program, you might hear either in January or in June whether or not you were funded. And the reason that takes so long is because there's two types of funding. There's competitive and formula funding, and the competitive dollars are harder to get, but you hear sooner about those. And then if you don't receive competitive funding, then you can receive formula funding through us. And we don't make those decisions until June. Most programs begin in August or September and last for 10 to 12 months. And when you apply to be an AmeriCorps program with us, it's a 3-year grant cycle. So each year you would have what's called a continuation, which is not reapplying, it's just kind of adding to your program. And then every 3 years you reapply. So I would encourage people, if you're thinking about this or you are wondering about what other programs there are in Indiana, to check out our website. We should have our application instructions on our website still from this past year. And I'd encourage people to read through those and think about if this is a good fit for them. And also look for, I linked at the bottom here, the resources for current grantees. That has a whole list of like our training calendar for the year, our handbook for our AmeriCorps programs, and that can give you an even better idea of what is expected of programs and organizations. Now, for those of you who are like, we are not going to take on a new program, this is a lot of work, it's going to be kind of difficult for us, there are other AmeriCorps options. So you could be a service site through one of our existing programs. You could look through that list that I just linked to in the last page. It has our public directory, and it's also actually linked on this page. So if you click on the public directory, you can see who already has a program, and maybe if you align with them, you could become a host site or a service site. It's the same thing. You be an AmeriCorps VISTA sponsor. So I talked about how VISTA is sort of that indirect service. You don't have to apply to have a whole program when you're a VISTA sponsor. Instead, you're essentially applying to have 1 or 2 people come to your organization for capacity building in a more indirect way. And that is, to become a VISTA sponsor, I can connect you to the CNCS state office here in Indiana. You could also be an NCCC sponsor, like I talked about, like we did at Habitat, or if you're thinking about a career change, you could be an AmeriCorps member yourself. Even if you aren't thinking about being an AmeriCorps member, if you know young people or really anybody who's thinking about starting in the nonprofit sector or doesn't really know what they want to do for the next year, we always encourage people to apply for AmeriCorps. So in the directory, potential members can talk directly to programs in our state, or they can visit the My AmeriCorps website, which is where you apply to be an AmeriCorps member. My information is on this slide, so feel free to email me or call me if you do have any follow-up questions, or if you ever have anybody who's interested in serving in AmeriCorps, I can certainly connect them in that way too.
Thank you all so much for your time today, and have a great afternoon.